The hunting grounds of Cavernish Prime were not meant for mercy. Selene Iveric knew this the moment her boots touched the crimson soil. The air tasted of copper and ozone, thick with the musk of 1,000 apex predators that called this death world home. Her scanning equipment hummed softly at her hip, cataloging atmospheric data that would mean nothing if she didn't survive the next hour. She was alone. The research team had scattered when the Vresk pack descended from the canopy 12 meters of scaled fury with teeth like obsidian shards. Standard protocol: survive first, regroup later. Selene had chosen a different path, one that led deeper into the Crimson Forest where even her colleagues feared to tread. That's when she heard it, a whimper. Small, broken, desperate. Selene froze. Every instinct screamed at her to keep moving, to ignore the sound and focus on her own survival. But humanity had not clawed its way from Terra's ancient savanna by abandoning the weak. Something in her DNA, something older than starships and plasma rifles, pulled her toward that sound. She found Tovik in a clearing, surrounded by a circle of his own blood. The cub was no larger than a Terran Wolf pup, though his species, the Vresk, would grow to become the apex predator of this entire sector. His scales were still soft, shimmering with iridescent patterns that would harden into armor within a year. But now those scales were torn, revealing pale flesh beneath. His hind leg twisted at an unnatural angle, and his golden eyes were glazed with pain and fear. Around the clearing, the forest had gone silent. Selene's hand moved instinctively to her sidearm, then stopped. Through the gaps in the trees she could see them, dozens of shapes watching. Vresk adults. Makir stalkers. Rendex hunters. Every predator within a kilometer had converged on this spot, drawn by the scent of blood and vulnerability. But none approached. They simply watched, their eyes fixed on the dying cub, on the human who had stumbled into their domain. Selene understood in that moment what she was witnessing. This was a test. Not of strength or speed, but of something far more fundamental. In the savage calculus of Cavernish Prime, the weak were culled, the injured were abandoned. To interfere was to mark oneself as prey or as something else entirely. She stepped into the clearing. The collective intake of breath from the watching predators was almost audible. Tovik's eyes focused on her, and a small sound escaped his throat, not quite a growl, not quite a plea. His body tensed, preparing for the final strike, for death to come from this strange two-legged creature. Instead, Selene knelt beside him. "Easy," she whispered, though she knew he couldn't understand the words. "I've got you." Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, pulling the medical kit from her pack. The emergency foam would stabilize the leg. The synthetic blood packets would replace what he'd lost. The pain suppressors would let him rest without the agony. Standard equipment for a xenobiologist working in hostile territory. But as her fingers gently touched Tovik's scales, brushing aside the dirt and blood, something shifted in the air. The watching predators began to move. Selene's heart hammered as shadows detached from the trees. A massive Vresk male, scarred and ancient, stepped into the clearing. His scales were dark as night, his eyes cold as the void between stars. Behind him, others followed, a Makir with fangs that could pierce starship hull plating, a Rendax whose claws had evolved to rend through composite armor. They formed a circle around Selene and the injured cub. And then, one by one, they lowered their heads. Not in submission, not in fear. In something that transcended language, that spoke to a truth older than civilization itself. The ancient Vresk male rumbled deep in his chest, a sound that vibrated through Selene's bones. She didn't need a translator to understand. "You honor the law we forgot." Humanity had earned its place among the stars not through superior weapons or faster ships, but through a peculiar defect in their evolution. Where other species saw weakness to be culled, humans saw potential to be nurtured. Where others abandoned the injured, humans stopped to bind wounds. It was inefficient. It was illogical. It had nearly driven them extinct a dozen times in their bloody history. But it had also made them into something unique in the galaxy, a species that could look at suffering and choose compassion over survival. Selene's hands continued their work, applying the foam, injecting the suppressors, splinting the broken leg with materials from her kit. Tovik's breathing steadied. His eyes, still fearful but no longer resigned to death, watched her with an intensity that seemed to pierce through to her soul. The ancient Vresk stepped closer. Selene forced herself not to flinch as his massive head lowered beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat of his breath. He sniffed at Tovik, then at Celine, his golden eyes studying her with an intelligence that matched any sentient species she'd encountered. Then he did something that would be recorded in xenobiological journals for centuries. He touched his forehead to hers. The gesture lasted only a moment, but in that contact, Celine felt the weight of recognition. She was not prey. She was not predator. She was something this world had never known, a creature that would stop in the middle of danger, surrounded by death, to save a life that was not her own. The predators began to withdraw, melting back into the forest as silently as they had arrived. The ancient Vresk lingered longest, his eyes moving between Celine and the cub she had saved. Then he too vanished, leaving only the whisper of displaced air. Celine finished her work and gently lifted Tovik into her arms. The cub was surprisingly light, his body relaxing against her as exhaustion and relief washed over him. She began the long walk back to base camp, her emergency beacon now active, her team already en route to her location. Behind her, the forest remained silent. But Celine knew that silence was not empty. It was filled with watching eyes, with predators who had learned something new about the strange species that walked upright and reached for the stars. They had learned that humanity's greatest weapon was not found in their arsenal. It was found in the gentle touch of a hand on an injured cub, in the choice to care when caring made no logical sense, in the stubborn refusal to let suffering go unanswered. As Celine emerged from the crimson forest, Tovik sleeping peacefully in her arms, she understood why humanity had survived every death world, every war, every cosmic horror the universe had thrown at them. Because in a galaxy built on the law of fang and claw, humans had brought something revolutionary. They had brought mercy, and that changed everything.